Hey yo, what's good? Welcome to The Gist with me, Jared. Here we go, another sequel that fails to live up to its predecessor. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera was a boring heist movie filled with plot contrivance and convenience. It missed the mark on what made the first movie enjoyable. It took way too long to get to the point. The first 2/3 of the movie was paced pretty slowly and wasn't all that entertaining or engaging. The heist itself didn't excite either. There were quite a few scenes that really didn't need to be in the movie, and there were characters that could have been written out entirely as well. These characters were only included to make the plot more complex, but it didn't make it more meaningful. The plot and storytelling didn't do a very good job at explaining what our bad guys were actually after, and the few scenes that we had to explain that were rushed through. If you're able to see beyond trying to make sense of the plot, then you might have a good time, but I was left disappointed. In my opinion, you're better off watching the first movie and disregarding this one entirely, despite its attempts to set up a third installment. Now, I'd like to compare the two films a bit more thoroughly, so there will be some spoilers here on out.
And the cop goes gangster.
My biggest gripes with Den of Thieves 2 comes down to tension and character. The first film does a solid job at establishing tension to keep the audience engaged in the setup aspects of the plot, until the culmination of the big heist in the third act. Both groups know about each other, and the maneuvering and posturing they undergo is quite gripping for the audience, especially as it relates to O'Shea Jackson's character of Donnie. The bridge and the connection between the two groups. The characters in the first movie are interesting and very flawed, so you want to see how these opposing groups will match up. The second film, however, fails to engage. It starts off with a heist scene just like in the first movie, but the setup for the big heist in the third act is not clearly conveyed, nor as coherent in comparison to the first film. The formation of the heist group is clunky and doesn't make sense if you think about it beyond surface level consumption. The movie tells us this is the first time they are all working together to pull off a big heist. It doesn't seem like a good idea, especially because of how combative they are with each other right off the jump.
So no one will be sheriff for you.
The sequel also doesn't effectively establish any interest in any of these crew members. The party scene was so silly and didn't serve narrative purpose on establishing the group's skillfulness and expertise as thieves. Rather, it conveyed a level of unseriousness and borderline incompetence that is in clear contrast with the first film. The first film sets up the team differently. Our Den of Thieves has a history of being in the military and working smaller jobs together. The first scene of the movie clearly establishes the roles and expectations of the group, and then the rest of the first movie builds upon the team dynamics. The scene with 50 Cent meeting his daughter's prom date is a very memorable part of the first movie. It reinforces the brotherly, familial connection between what the movie paints as our main thieves. This was a small but impactful scene that endeared our ne'er-do-wells to the audience. I remember it striking a personal chord with my friend group at the time because of how relatable it was. So, when it comes to the development of characters, Den of Thieves 1 did an effective job at endearing the audience to understand and possibly even care about these questionable protagonists. Whereas Den of Thieves 2 only led me to question the protagonists, as the decisions they make seem to violate the expertise we are told that they have. As mentioned, the sequel was paced pretty slowly, and I was bored for the vast majority of the film. The car chase was mildly entertaining, but was predictable. In comparison, Den of Thieves 1 was an enjoyable heist film throughout. Though the plot wasn't anything innovative, the story was still able to get me invested into the characters. It was very engaging to see the two groups strategize at going against one another, playing a game of cat and mouse. The first Den of Thieves did really well at painting the cops as the bad guys and rooting for the criminals committing the crime. Gerard Butler and his cop associates were very convincing as the dirty, grimy, and extremely questionable police detectives in the sheriff's department. The character motivations were clear and easy to understand. As mentioned, we got quite a few narrative beats to understand who our criminal ex-military individuals were, and it was fairly easy to believe Donnie as the character who's in over his head but trying to catch a break. And then the twist at the end of the first film was that Donnie was the mastermind behind it all. It was a really nice surprise. Even though there are still plot conveniencies in the first movie, the overall excitement of the heist, the engagement to the story and how it was fleshed out, was able to overcome some of those plot issues. But then with the sequel, it recontextualizes the events in the first film in a negative manner. Instead of Donnie being a mastermind, someone who's always in control, aware, and mindful of all variables, he makes too many mistakes that belittle his character. In the opening heist scene of the sequel, he doesn't realize what he's stealing, nor who he's stealing from. And then he trusts a cop who he fooled in the first movie, but then shows up out of nowhere in the middle of his next job. The sequel gave us a worser version of Donnie. Also in the sequel, Nick is still the degenerate mess of a man that he is in the first. We also come to find out he no longer has his job, and yet he's still able to pursue a case that's already been closed, and get support from a colleague in the first film who ultimately didn't like him. But apparently, that's not the case in the second movie. Additionally, there was a scene with Gerard Butler and a stripper from the first movie that was really nonsensical. We are led to believe that a significant amount of time has passed since the end of Den of Thieves 1 and the beginning of Den of Thieves 2. So why is Nick just now questioning her for more information on Donnie? I already knew the sequel was taking a turn for the worst when it revealed that she knew the heist details of the first film. Den of Thieves 1 frames Donnie as clever and cunning, leaving both the criminals and the sheriffs as fools and none the wiser. But with the second film, the stripper girlfriend, who was hardly involved at all in the first movie, knew of Donnie's plan when Sean Merriman, the leader of the group, and her boyfriend didn't even know what the real plan was. A recontextualizing of events in the first movie that doesn't make it better, it just made it worse. And then somehow, out of work Gerard Butler is able to go off to France with an expired US Marshal's permit without any issues, to pursue a case that's already been closed, and then he finds exactly where Donnie is residing. It's moments like these that really left me disappointed with the sequel. Things were way too convenient for Gerard Butler's character. It's also worth mentioning that it was not believable that the new heist gang would let Gerard Butler into their group just because he's an ex-cop. These supposedly skilled and resourceful people will let a stranger show up out of nowhere, get intimately involved right before the heist needs to be done. They're apparently aware of his background and no one thinks he'll double-cross them. How would they not believe that Gerard Butler's character was too much of a loose cannon and a loose thread to be trusted? Plot armor, that's why. And then you could see it coming from a mile away that once you kick out the lady of the group's ex-lover, that was immediately going to come back to bite the main group in the butt. Another nonsensical decision. More than that, the sequel also introduces a tertiary gang to make the plot more convoluted. They conveniently rescue our main characters and are really only there to set up a third installment. Oy vey. And that's the gist to some of my spoiler-free and spoiler-filled thoughts on Den of Thieves 2, Pantera. A really disappointing sequel that you're honestly probably better off skipping. The movie was very slowly paced, hardly engaging, and just didn't know when to end, as it gave us 3 or 4 closing scenes. If you're looking for a heist film, just watch the first one. What did you think of Den of Thieves 2? Did you have some of the same criticisms as I did? Hit me up! Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'll catch you next time on The Gist.